all the dear leaders, dear women leaders we have lost.
شهدائنا في مجزرة باريس، وبعدها سنبدأ بالنقاش.
Okay, okay, let's show the video. Difficult. Well, then to please let me take this time. Okay, the screen is here now. We can watch it. We as women, we have talked a lot about femicide and how women have been targeted by patriarchy and male violence. It's for women, the world has turned into a place of civil war because of these femicides, but we have not spoken much about how our femicide and politicide intersect to kill our women leaders. And in the video, you have seen 30 of them, but there are many more. And we commemorate them with love, respect, and we try to follow their steps. And we will discuss this intersection between femicide and politicized today, in, as I said, in 3 different contexts where women's struggle for freedom has become so important and have been recognized worldwide, in Kurdistan, in Iran, and in Afghanistan. We have 3 speakers. Our first speaker is Meral Çiçek. She was born in 1983 in a Kurdish guest worker family in Germany. She started political and women's activism at the age of 16 within the Kurdish Women's Peace Office in Düsseldorf. While studying political science in Frankfurt, she started to work as a reporter and editor for the only daily Kurdish newspaper in Europe, Yeni Özgür Politika, for which she still writes a weekly column. In 2014, Meral co-founded the Kurdish Women's Relations Office in southern Kurdistan, northern Iraq. She's also an editorial board member of the Gynecology journal. Our second speaker will be Shiva Mahbobi. I'm hoping that I pronounced your name correctly. If not, you can correct me when it's your turn. Women's rights, she's a women's rights activist, spokesperson for Campaign to Free Political Prisoners in Iran, and she herself is a former political prisoner. Shiva was a student activist in Iran. She was arrested twice, once at the age of 12 for a few days, and the second time at the age of 16 for over 3 years. Following her release, Shiva continued her activities and eventually had to flee Iran and go to Turkey in 1992. She was a refugee and women's rights campaigner and worked with the International Federation of Iranian Refugees in Turkey. She then went to Toronto, Canada, where she was the coordinator of the Action Committee in defense of women's rights in Iran. She moved to the
ودافعت عن حقوق المرأة الإيرانية.
Can you switch? Okay. She then went to Toronto, Canada, where she was the coordinator of the Action Committee in defense of women's rights in Iran. She moved to the UK in 2001 and was in charge of public relations for the International Committee Against Stoning from 2002 to 2004. She is the co-founder of the Campaign to Free Political Prisoners in Iran. And our third speaker is Zolfar. She's from Afghanistan, and she's from Afghanistan Activist Collective. This collective is working on the advocacy and awareness on topics of Afghanistan, Afghan refugees, and asylum seekers. She is also part of a freedom of movement collective called Progetto 20K, and she is active in the EU borders. Now I will give the floor to Meral, and I will ask Meral and all our speakers to speak slowly so our translators can do their job. Thank you. Please, Meral, the floor is yours.
تفضلي ميرال.
Thank you very much, Nazan. I think there is a problem with the Arabic translation still. Despite, I think there is a kind of technical issue with the Arabic translation. Hopefully they can fix it. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to commemorate all female leaders, activists, politicians that have been assassinated by the alliance between the state, capitalism, and militias worldwide, and especially because today is January 9, the 10th anniversary of the murder of 3 Kurdish women, and one of them was Sakine Cansız, who was something like the living memory also of the Kurdish women's liberation movement. In particular, I would like to commemorate them and express once again that we will take revenge by realizing the women's revolution in our region and worldwide. Yes, so for the Kurdish women's liberation movement on 9 January 2013, 10 years ago, kind of new period began. Or we can say that the Turkish state entered into a new phase on that day, together with the murder of our comrades in Paris. What kind of new phase was this? Politics of systematically assassinating, targeting Kurdish women leaders, especially outside its state borders. Because I think this is very important to underline that most of these murders happened outside the borders of the Turkish state. And what is the main objective or the main goal in targeting leading female figures of the liberation movement on a systematical level? I think on one side, the aim of the Turkish state is to destroy, to break the Kurdish resistance for liberation by killing its leaders. And the Turkish state is very well aware of the leading role the autonomously organized women's movement does play within the Kurdish liberation struggle, that it's something like the motor force of the revolution in Kurdistan. And because of this, in order to break the resistance, to break to liquidate in a way the revolutionary process, they target the leading force of the revolution. A further aspect is its ideological stance towards women, or better said, gender freedom and equality. The ruling regime that consists of Erdogan's AKP and the ultra-nationalist MHP, they built an alliance between green, that means Islamist fascism, and black, that means ultra-nationalist fascism in Turkey. And common to them is deep misogyny and an ideological view that sees women only as birthing machines that produce more soldiers to sacrifice their lives for the so-called fatherland. And fascism, I mean, if we look at historical examples and also current examples, we can say that fascism is always anti-woman. We could see this clearly in fascist regimes in, let's say, the 1930s and 1940s, like in Germany, in Spain, in Italy under Hitler, Mussolini, and Franco, as well as today in the example of Turkey, Iran, and Afghanistan, as well as in the example of, for example, Duterte's regime in the Philippines, or Putin's regime in Russia, or the recently voted out government of Brazil under Bolsonaro, for example. And there are many more contemporary examples also that show us the direct connection between fascism and misogyny or anti-woman politics. Now, if we look at the timing of the murder of Paris 10 years ago, I think that's also very important to understand under what kind of background this new phase was started by the Turkish state. Short time before, let's say 6 months before the murder of Sakine Cansız, Fidan Doğan, and Leyla Şailemez in Paris, in Rojava, in the north of Syria, or the west of Kurdistan, how we call it, the revolutionary process started, the Rojava Revolution of the 19th July 2012. And this revolutionary process is still called by us a women's revolution. not just because of the role the YPJ, the Women's Protection Forces, were playing in the struggle and resistance against ISIS. It's because of the character also of the process of building a democratic alternative, a new system of self-administration of the peoples that is led by women. And the politics of assassinating female leaders in order to stop the women's revolution, and by doing so preventing the Kurdish people from building an alternative system of democratic self-governance, was very crucial for the Turkish state and is still very crucial. So I think it's very important to put also this new phase in connection to the developments that have been happening on the side of the Kurdish women's movement at that time, and to see it as a kind of direct attack or direct answer also to these kind of big developments. I think an important issue is also in this connection to break the effect and influence of the Kurdish women's liberation movement with its theoretical and practical experiences, like, for example, co-presidency system, equal participation and representation, self-defense, genealogy, the science of woman and life, all what is summarized in the formula Jinjian Azadi, woman, life, freedom, and practiced in a woman's revolution. And I think they also wanted to break the effects and influences of the Kurdish women's movement on the world woman, and especially the woman of the region. And by doing this, preventing the world women's revolution also, and ensuring the continued existence of the patriarchal capitalist state system. And this explains also the role of foreign forces, especially the NATO, in Turkey's politics of assassinating women leaders. Except the killing of Sevi Demir, Fatma Uyar, and Pakize Nair in Silopi in January 2016, all assassinations of leading Kurdish female militants happened in NATO's control areas. Both murders of Paris, as well as assassinations of Kurdish women in Rojava, in North and East Syria, and the north of Iraq or South Kurdistan. And these places are mostly controlled by the USA. In Rojava, only 2 assassinations were executed with guns. The rest were implemented with armed drones in a region whose airspace is controlled by the USA and partly by Russia. And this shows us that beside Turkey, also NATO as a system is responsible for this politics of assassinations. It is not only responsible, but part of this politics of murdering leading Kurdish women. And this is why, after 10 years, France still does not uncover the murder of Paris, and by doing so opened the way to the second massacre of Paris, killing Emine Kara, who has been an active militant of our movement since 1989. And now the question is what to do. How can we halt these crimes? How can we protect the lives of our leaders? I think that one aspect is fighting together against impunity. There should be transnational struggle for this, because there are hundreds, maybe thousands of cases of political feminicide only after 2000, but there haven't been something like tribunal or any other big international campaign for justice and verity. And I think this is a very important issue in order really to challenge the system and to stop the murder of women leaders, of women, of female politicians, of activists around the world, that we need also to internationalize the struggle against it. And we could start by fighting against impunity, because most of the murders are outside. They are not in prison, they are not, there is no justice. So one aspect of the struggle is also to struggle for justice. And on the other side, we need to find ways of stopping them and protecting women's leadership also. And maybe this is one point we can later discuss together. Yes, and this is what I wanted to say for the beginning. Thank you very much for listening. And yes, so I hope that we will have a strong discussion later.
Thank you, Meral. Thank you for your presentation and for contextualizing the violence against women leaders, especially in Kurdistan. And yeah, Shiva, the floor is yours. And am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes,
Okay.
Shiva Mahbobi, yes. Thank you, Nazan. Well, thank you, Meral, for really interesting discussion. And I'm hoping I would be more interested to see how we go with this discussion. The issue of impunity is really, really important. So, of course, what I want to talk about is mainly focused on Iran. First of all, it's really an honor to be here, especially today in commemoration of the memories of Fidan, Sakina, and Layla, and many other women. I think when you think about it, and those pictures that you showed, like femicide happening everywhere, literally in different forms and shape, and especially women who dare to, excuse me, let me just disconnect it. Can you hear me now? I think you can't hear me. Can you hear me now? Yeah?
Yes, we can hear you, yes.
Yes? Okay, okay. That's fine. Okay, sorry about that. So what I'm trying to say that it's happening everywhere, but in women who are trying to basically dare to stand up, like all those leaders that we said, and many actually women that they're not necessarily defined as the leaders, but they are leaders in their life and where they work and all that. But it hasn't stopped the fight for equality. If you think about it, like when in 1960, the famous Mirabal sisters in Dominican Republic were assassinated by the Dominican dictator on November 25th. That day stayed in the history, basically, and become a day to highlight the violence against women. So when you fast forward to 2013, to today, when they assassinated Fidan, Sakina, and Layla, the three Kurdish women's rights activists, in Paris, the fight didn't stop and still continued in almost every country, and specifically related to today, Turkey, Afghanistan, and Iran. If I go back to Iran, after the revolution of 1979, when the Islamic regime hijacked our revolution, the first attack on people was an attack on women's rights. So the regime thought that suppressing half of the population, women, makes it easier to suppress and control the society. I mean, although discrimination against women and targeting women happening in almost everywhere, every country, however, under the Islamic rules, violence against women is ideological, is systematic, and legal. So being a free woman is a crime, and you're targeted for not obeying, as simple as that. So the Islamic regime attempted to use hijab from the very beginning as a method of controlling and subjugating women in Iran. The regime wanted to make women invisible. This is why the fight against hijab has become such an important aspect of the revolution of women's life freedom in today's Iran. And I will come back to that at the end, but I want to just take you back again and give you some background. So after the brutal attack on women in Iran in 1979 by the Islamic regime, they wanted to impose hijab. Women kept fighting and refused the identity of the obedient women that the Islamic regime attempted to create. Following the initial attack on women in 1979, women intensified their fight. So they didn't back down. They intensified their fight for equality. And in the 80s, many women were political activists and leaders of underground political parties. And many women became freedom fighters, also known as Peshmerga. So you might ask how one of the most misogynist regimes in the world tolerated women defying the regime and even becoming leaders. Well, they didn't, because in 80s, they arrested hundreds of women, they tortured them, and they executed them. I remember when I was in prison in 80s, in different prisons, there were hundreds of women were arrested for their activism or only for challenging hijab law on the street. Throughout the 44 years of Islamic regime being in power, every single woman who have been arrested by the regime is in the fear of being raped and sexually assaulted. Women have been subjected to what is called gender-based torture. In the 80s, some female political prisoners were forced to marry their torturer, and they were threatened if they don't accept this, their family will be executed. Pregnant women been tortured, and especially in the 80s, interrogators would threaten the female prisoners that they would take their newborn baby and they will give it to an Islamic family to raise. And then the Islamic regime, the other thing that they used to do, I mean, nowadays they just rape women without any excuse. The Islamic regime says executing a virgin girl is forbidden in Islam. So what they did in 80s was that the guard would so-called marry the imprisoned girl and then raped her before the execution. In some cases, after the execution, the rapist would take a pack of sweets and would go to the family of the girl, informing them that she got executed, but before that, he married her. So you can just imagine the torture that the imprisoned girl went through before the execution. Also imagining the suffering and trauma that the parents went through hearing that their daughter got raped and got executed. So they created every sort of method to control us in prison, outside of the prison. But then gender-based torture has increased over the 4 decades. Female political prisoners have been raped, sexually assaulted by the interrogators and the guards. Pregnant women are tortured and kept in inhuman conditions. Just recently, in the current revolution, there was a girl called Masuma, 14 years old girl, because they raped many young girls. And she was abducted by the security forces because she took off her scarf in school. In the detention center, she was raped repeatedly, and she had severe vaginal bleeding. Sadly, she died as a result. And apparently, Masuma's mother wanted to expose this, but the security forces made her disappear, and no one knows where she is. Another young woman, Armita Abbasi, 20 years old, was abducted in October 2022 and repeatedly raped. Despite that, Armita has not stopped fighting, currently in prison, and has recently went on hunger strike to protest against her situation. So these are all, to me, these are all leaders that every single day they fight. During the current protests, the IRCG, Islamic Revolutionary Guards, their guards were groping and sexually assaulting female protesters on the street and while they were arresting them. So you can imagine all that, which I just tried to summarize it. But despite all what these women have been through, when they are released, the amazing thing is right outside of the prison gate, they remove their hijab to show their fight and resistance. Among them, a young woman just recently got released, Mina Yagoubi, whose face was completely bruised as a result of the torture, but her scarf was on her shoulder and didn't cover her hair. So when you look at this revolution, the role of women, it's a women-led revolution, and the world needs to accept it. This revolution is a continuation of what started 44 years ago. The previous generation of women did not conform to the Islamic rule and refused to be a piece of a property. And the previous generation of women taught the whole society in Iran that the society is free only when women and men are equal. And the first step for that is obviously to overthrow the Islamic regime. So coming to now again, the generation before Jina Mahsa Amini bravely confronted the Islamic regime and its misogynist laws. Jina and the recent brave generation of women continues the same fight. and walk in the same footstep. Because if you think about it, as a woman, like we carry lots of trauma from our mothers and our grandmothers, but we need to remember we also carry lots of resilience and bravery from them too. So Gina's arrest was not a single incident and did not happen in isolation. If you think about it, when Gina was arrested, she was not wearing the hijab according to the Islamic law. Gina, in her own way, refused to obey the Islamic dress code. So Gina belongs to the current generation in Iran and Afghanistan, same generation, same characteristic, and some of other neighboring countries that continues the fight for equality and leads the revolution of women, life, freedom. I guess when I think about it, women, life, freedom is not just a slogan. It's the essence of the current revolution in Iran. And I believe in Afghanistan as well, which will overthrow the Islamic regime in Iran and will define the future of Iran. So when we think about the leaders, no, leaders will not die. They continue living and they pass the torch to other people, and they become the symbols of fight for equality. So I just wanted to say all these points because I think it's important, really important, to see that when women are targeted because women are leading, because they're scared of us, that's why. And when that comes under the Islamic rules, that even worse. And it's really important what I think Meral said. Why is it that so many women are killed? Because they're not obeying whatever the rule is, but there is no punishment for that. I mean, why is it in, for example, South Africa, the apartheid at the time, they boycotted the South Africa because of the race? Why is it in all these Islamic stricken countries, they kill women and they kill leaders who are female, and there is no punishment for that, and they completely been normalized? So I guess that's a very important aspect of it, that we need to think about it collectively, what we can do. We might be from different organizations, but I believe we can think about it and put a collective action toward that. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiva, especially for linking political assassination to prison and torture, because they cannot be separated really. They are part of the politicized and femicide regime of these authoritarian governments. And now I give you the floor, Zolfar, so you can talk about the Afghan context.
Wow, that was definitely very informative from both of Meral and Shiva. I would, I mean, maybe I will give you a little bit of the current day situation of Afghanistan, and then maybe work a little bit backwards and forward. Right now, we are 1.5 years into the Taliban regime that was handed over. And from that, like, there has been many, so basically, over the 20 years of the intervention that the NATO and the US had in Afghanistan, the first initial project of coming or having military intervention was to free the poor, sad Afghan women from the bad Afghan men or Taliban that was oppressing them. So 20 years of intervention with, of course, a very puppet regime and corrupt system created also at the same time the strongest Taliban forces that now exist, with a amount of trade agreements that were happening throughout the time and are currently still happening. And at the same time, the woman is always instrumentalized, whether it is for liberation or for oppression. And now we have had 1.5 years of the Taliban regime with continuously the woman particularly being oppressed. I mean, there are also other rules and other attacks, but this is like one of the main focus. It started off with the schools being closed from 6th grade on, with the promise that it would be open with the trade agreements and the agreements that they've done in Qatar since 2018 with the US and other international community, which has been medialized that they will be having a new regime, a more progressive kind of politics. And even though the Afghan voices have said that this cannot be true and will not be true, there was reinforcement of the international media that would give like the Taliban a platform and kind of sort of narrative that they will be different this time. So even though our struggle has been very small in the space that it receives in the public sphere, our protests are very low, like amount of people, and definitely the way that the news has also shifted and in its narrative also shows like how we will end up back at the same point. And at this moment, we see that the gender apartheid that's happening in Afghanistan is like nowhere to be found in the world. There, you cannot work as a woman. You cannot go to university. They want to make rules that women have to be married off to Taliban, that women have to be married off after 18 and under 35 if you're a widow. So these rules are created so that not only in your household you will be oppressed, also in your daily life, outside of your daily life, and you cannot even go to the market without a male companion. Which this also means that even if you want to evacuate, like women that are in danger, that have spoken out against the Taliban, that have worked over the last 20 years against the Taliban, are not even able to be evacuated because all of the areas are controlled. So we have like women activists that go on the street, that get killed, they get kidnapped, they get raped, many of which we don't even know their names. Like the international media has left Afghanistan. So this also becomes much more difficult to actually understand like what is happening. At the same time, you have now in the recent times more with the university closing and the jobs being completely closed, that men started to also get more active and like protesting the universities, for example, not joining their exams, but at the same time the contextualization in Afghanistan, you have a terrorist regime, like Taliban's are terrorists, and they're not afraid to like do mass shooting and mass killing, like open fire to protesters, particularly if there are men involved. In fact, if there's a woman-only protest, they are less violent than like men joining, which makes it in general more complex as well, because one of the aspects of these like terror regimes is also to divide more anything that is particular between gender, between ethnicities. Afghanistan has many ethnicities, so the divide between ethnicities and gender, which is very much the divide and conquer rule, is so to another extent now that it has probably not been before. So attacks to certain neighborhoods that have like certain ethnicities have been more frequent, and there's like a built-up tension towards like which ethnicity suffers more, and by that like there is a very extreme amount of hopelessness, and the amount of unity between the people is gone to a very low level in this time. So you have all of these happening, and then you still see like the trade agreements between like certain corporations that are doing it with the Taliban, despite not recognizing the regime, seeing the active efforts of how they are still able to funnel in like their opium industry, which is used by the whole world in the hospitals, in the pharmaceutical industry, not only the illicit drugs. So you have so many factors in, and one of the big points, which is the gender of the woman, is like a reason to always distract away from actually the terror regimes that, or the radicalization of certain groups, and why they are continuously funded or getting supported by different kind of by different kind of governments, by different kind of interests of corporations, because the Taliban, if you think about it, before were such a small group that were trying to fight the Russians earlier on, and this small group couldn't have reached where it was without the interest, without the fueling. And then the woman is the symbol of all of these struggles. And historically speaking, this poor, defenseless Afghan woman is not actually true. We have had different figures in our history, like my life from Maiwand, who was leading against the Brits. We've had Mina Kishwar Kamal, who was also assassinated. She was also leading. So there is like a general view of how the Afghan woman is completely oppressed with the burqa and has no voice on her own. And you have the reality, which is just silenced women that are continuously standing up, and even if they are raped, they will go again to the street, and even if they are tortured, they will raise their voice. But the way that this voice has been silenced, we can also just see it on a basic level on the social media aspect. All the channels that are coming from Afghanistan, which is like showing the resistance of women, showing the resistance of different areas. Like, you are not even able to share them without being shadow banned. Like, it doesn't even reach people. And this is like not what free communication of like civil society movements, when they are connected to geopolitical strategies, is interesting, because there is like a way to silence certain struggles, and there's a way to uplift certain struggles. And Afghanistan has experienced at this time in recent history, both in 2001, it has received the mass media attention and the reason for intervention. And in this moment, even though you can compare it to the same situation, it's like received very little in comparison to that, even though in a very short amount of time, the Taliban has shown themselves on how they are radical and against women liberation and even a free society for men. They are also not able to play music. They will also get killed for that. So yeah, anyway, that is a little bit mixed, but hope it gives a little overview.
Thank you very much, Zolfar. Especially, I think it's very important to link what's happening in Afghanistan, in Iran, and definitely in Kurdistan to international powers, to how capital and imperialist interests also intersect with the interests of authoritarian regimes. I think this is really important, and thank you for emphasizing that. Okay, now we have another comrade, another friend, another guest here from Feministas de Abya Yala, and they will also speak about this important topic, but there is a problem just now before, and we have to solve that. They are going to speak in Spanish, So for everyone to listen to them in English, I think we have to switch to Spanish in interpretation, because our friend is going to translate from Spanish to English. Let's first try that, and if it doesn't work, then I will let you know what we should do. So the floor is yours. Please, let's listen. The floor is yours.
Buenas tardes, compañeros. Estamos muy agradecidas de que nos hayan invitado a dar unas palabras que vamos a tratar de que sean muy breves, porque lo que queríamos transmitirles desde este continente, desde este Aviala, desde esta tierra, de Lina Sánchez y de tantas compañeras que aman, que amamos la revolución de las mujeres de Kurdistán, y que en este día tan importante para todas nosotras exigimos justicia por Sakine, por Leila, por Fidan, Naihan, Gina, Evin, y por todas las compañeras que han caído o que son mártires allá, como nuestro continente, el continente de Berta Cáceres, asesinada en Honduras ya hace unos años, donde la hermana Mapuche también fue asesinada, Macarena Valdés, en el gobierno, bajo el gobierno del Estado chileno, y tantas compañeras no se han caído y siguen cayendo por defender la tierra, por defender la vida. Las mujeres acá y allá, en todo el mundo, estamos en la primera línea de la defensa de la vida y de la defensa de la tierra. Y por eso tenemos también tantos castigos encima, pero tanta esperanza en nuestras luchas en cada uno de nuestros territorios. Por eso tenemos también la seguridad de que la revolución de las mujeres es una propuesta política que viene a darnos una oportunidad a las mujeres en todo el mundo. El confederalismo democrático, genealogy, son palabras que empiezan a sonar y a escucharse en nuestros territorios y que nos permiten pensar que también nuestros modos específicos como mujeres, como luchadoras, defensoras de la tierra, pueden entrelazarse, y necesitamos que se entrelacen para que seamos más fuertes en nuestra capacidad de respuesta al patriarcado, al capitalismo, al racismo, al colonialismo. Todos los relatos que ustedes hicieron recién nos llegan al corazón, nos duelen, pero también nos dan mucha fuerza, porque entendemos que nos están sucediendo los mismos dolores y que vamos a conseguir la unidad necesaria para entrelazarnos y para gritar mucho más fuerte: Shin, Xian, Asadí. Mujer, vida, libertad es también nuestra consigna, desde Aviala hasta Kurdistán. Muchas gracias, compañeras, amigas, camaradas, las sentimos muy cerca de nuestros corazones. Estamos con ustedes y no están solas.
Thank you so much. It was really, really important. Your contribution is so dear, so important for us, because your contribution shows how both patriarchy operates us in all continents, operates and targets us and attacks us in all continents in similar ways, but also our resistance continues in all continents in similar ways. And we need so much more, in my opinion, to act. We have to find ways to act collectively. We have to find ways to act together and to organize more to strengthen our power in a continent, globally. So thank you very much for your contribution. Okay, now we open the floor to questions, to comments. And what you can do is there's a question answer space where you can put your questions, but you can also raise your hand if you want, and we will open your video so we can see you and you can ask your question in person. But while you are figuring that out, and I will also follow YouTube to see if there are questions coming from YouTube. There are already 2 questions that we have received. The first one comes from Adriana Weller, and she says, I'm a socialist feminist, a member of Radical Women in Seattle, Washington, US branch, and a supporter of Kurdish liberation. We are very concerned about what can be done now, specifically via international solidarity. Also, what do the speakers support as a solution to Kurdish oppression? I will read the other question too, so everybody can have their turn to answer both questions. The second question comes from Rahila Gupta, and her question is, what are the prospects for the Iranian women's revolution? Is there any contact between them and Rojava? Are there any organizational structures emerging? Okay, Meral, maybe we can start with you.
Okay, thank you very much for these questions. It's not easy to answer them, I think, but I will do my best. So I think what about the question of Adrienne about international solidarity. So how can international solidarity of women look like? I think one issue is really to show not just the public, but especially the state system, the international state system, that we care about our leaders, that we care about the assassinations, that their lives are worth. Because I think that's one issue which in a way encourages them, that they think, okay, we can kill them and nothing happens. There is impunity. I think this is one very important issue, that we struggle against this by standing up for them, by really showing a reaction to each murder in the most strong sense. I think that's a very important issue. Another issue is, I was mentioning in my speech the role also of NATO. For example, in Rojava and northeast Syria, this year, in 2022, we reached the highest number of assassinations of female leaders compared to the years before. So it's showing that it's increasing. And most of them really happened by drone attacks. So that means that Turkey is able to send its killer drones above, transborder to a place whose air space is controlled by the USA. So what is the role then of the USA? So I think that's also one important aspect for women in the USA to protest, to challenge their own government's role in this issue. So I think this might be also one way of showing international solidarity, not just to protest against Turkish attacks that murder leading women, but at the same time also to enlighten the international collaboration which is happening also. I mean, for example, why do we still demand justice 10 years after the killing of Sakine, Fidan and Leyla? Because we see that the truth is sacrificed once again for state interests. So therefore, we need really to challenge these kind of issues. We have to in a way, to enlighten what is happening in interstate relations, and enlightening also the responsibilities of our governments, of the states, the international aspects of these murders, and really raising our voices for our killed leaders, and show the world that they are not able to just go away with it. I think this is very important.
Thank you, Meral. Now, Shiva, I would like to add actually another question to this. Are you happy with the international solidarity shown with women from Iran? I am also wondering about that. Because I mean, it's very important to show solidarity with Kurdish women, but also with women in Iran and with Afghanistan. These are the three hot spots right now where a women's revolution is becoming visible. So yeah, I wanted to just add that. And before that, also say hi to our friends from Netherlands. They are greeting us and sending solidarity overseas progressive Pakistanis. I think it's an important greeting, and salute to us, our friends from Pakistan in Netherlands. Hello to you too. Yes, Shiva.
Okay, well, first of all, I just wanted to say that I guess when I think about Afghanistan, I get really angry because I guess it's really been ignored around the world. But in terms of, you asked, first of all, regarding that question, that what are the prospects for the Iranian women revolution? I think this revolution will overthrow the Islamic regime. This is different. This is different than anything, as people in Iran says, don't call it a protest anymore, it's a revolution. And I guess the important thing is this revolution is very unique because it's the slogan is women, life, freedom. And that says a lot about the even quality of that. And we have to keep it on that basically aim. And is there a contact between them and Rojava? I'm sure there are, because some of also Iranian women working from Kurdistan working with Rojava, like organization from Rojava, but I can't say specifically who and what. But regarding the organization, if it's, you said, are there any organizational structures emerging? No, because you see, remember in Iran, in any women organization who even try to make awareness, they will get arrested, they would put in prison. We had one that's called the Women's Voice. We had that one, that Nedai Zanan Iran. We had that one, that what they did basically, a few progressive women, they tried to make awareness regarding domestic violence, regarding all that, which is quite normal in other countries, but they were arrested, they were given sentences. So no, I think right now what is really important is to get rid of the Islamic regime. And without that, I don't think anything is possible. And in terms of the, I hope I answered the question. Do let me know if you need me to explain more. I don't want to take so much time. I think in terms of the international solidarity, Nazan, we never had that much of a support. It's amazing, actually. And I'm mainly talking about people, not the governments. And that's actually because I always say it. I'm an activist, other people are activists, and we do campaign in, every day, 24 hours. But the attention that we get from the world is because of these brave women. That's all it is. Burning your hijab, going on the street, confronting a IRGC guard. It's not easy. It's literally you saying, I'm going to go forward to be killed. That's what happened. So I think it's amazing. And I'm really, really glad the slogan Women, Life, Freedom has echoed around the world. I mean, all the celebrities, all other people, they say the same thing. And many, many magazines, they had to speak about it. But at the same time, is it enough? I don't think it's enough, unfortunately. I think, in my view, that's what we are trying to do. I think all this solidarity needs to be a pressure on the governments. So just if you imagine, like a month ago, I think finally they kicked out of Islamic regime from UN Women Commission on the Status of Women. They finally did that. And it's outrageous they accepted them to the first place. I'm not saying necessarily UN agency does a lot for people. But what I'm trying to say now, what we're trying to do to put pressure on the government, and that is possible by that international solidarity. So we need to form that international solidarity to something tangible and feasible that can actually push this government. What we want to shut down the regime's embassy, to expel the ambassadors, and to stop saying to the Islamic regime, saying you need to stop killing people, which is ridiculous when they do that. So it's really amazing. It's really important, but we need to keep that momentum. Because with now, when you look at it, they have executed already 4 people. I would say all my activity, all these years that I've been active, I've never seen that many arrests. Like, I would say kidnapping is not an arrest. So something like tens of thousands. We don't even know their name. We don't even know where they are. So I guess that international solidarity needs to be materialized in something to force this government to stop their basically ties with the regime.
Thank you, Shiva. And now, Zolfar, I give you the floor. I am wondering what you have to say about international solidarity. You have actually talked about it a little bit, but maybe you can also address whether there are some structures emerging that can, it's structures of communication, structures of solidarity that are emerging for women from Afghanistan to act together with other women. And maybe also I'm adding because I am myself curious. Also, maybe you can talk about prisons in Afghanistan as well, because we don't know much about whether women are being arrested in Afghanistan as well. So maybe you can comment on that.
Okay, I will start with the solidarity point. There is no solidarity, like there's very minimal solidarity for the gravity of the extremity. What's happening in Afghanistan is it's unbelievable. It's not something imaginable. Like, I think that even the average person cannot imagine that you cannot go around the corner of the street without like a male companion. Like, I think this simple thing, like everyone that is from Afghanistan says like women in Afghanistan are breathing dead. They're the breathing dead, like they exist, they're breathing, but they're not living. And like, I think even though there are continuous efforts made to show resilience and resistance, whether it is to do online things or things like that. But right now, like, you have on a lot of streets, the cameras that are put in, women are not able to even meet in groups. Even meeting in groups is like something that is suspicious. That could mean they're either working or they're doing some, so I think that for the extremity that there are completely zero women's rights in Afghanistan, I would expect a lot more from the feminist movements around the world, which I'm not necessarily would say too disappointed on other global South feminist movements, because they have enough problems. But I think when it comes to mainstream feminist movements, there's no solidarity or very minimal punctual, as if there's no continuity, as if after you make one statement it just stops, even though we know that it's getting worse. So every day is worse, and every day that we don't have this continuity, it's difficult. And I do a lot of demonstrations in Berlin, which is one of the biggest places to do demonstrations, and I mean, I see how people don't attend, and they are aware, and I mean, everyone reads the news, so they're also aware of that. But there has been an active effort over the last 40 years to desensibilize the feelings that's part of the capitalistic and patriarchal society, that it desensibilizes people to have feelings towards a people or an area. So you don't feel your empathy towards how bad the situation is, which then the effect is that there is not a lot of solidarity. And I think this is one of the effects of this capitalistic structures. One of the capitalistic tendencies is of course, you use Afghanistan as a playground for its geopolitical strategies, whether it's pipelines, oil, mountains, coal, lithium, the e-industry that is continuously advertised in Germany, e-industry, where do you get your lithium from? At least your stolen one. The Taliban are a group that is cheaper to control than the presence of the NATO and the US country being there was more expensive. So they did their trade agreements. They were fine with the woman not having any rights. And in this case, the news and the way that it's also presented is also shown that let's make this topic a side topic, so that you don't actually understand how this consumeristic behavior that we have in the global north is affecting the instabilities of the global south. And then usually the woman and the femicide will then increase in those areas. So
just to push you a little bit more, you didn't answer though the question. What happens, for example, when a woman, I mean, are there many arrests of women? Are there a lot of women in prisons like in Iran?
I wouldn't even say per se prisons. They just get kidnapped and you don't know what happens to them. They just get kidnapped, and then I mean, I would say if you were somehow a known person or then people will know your name, or then it kind of gets more of attention. But I mean, right now, for example, whatever happens in the villages, we have no idea, because there's no media presence. So when we talk about Afghanistan, we also just talk about the larger cities that we have an attention of, or awareness of. But what happens in the villages is a whole other invisibility that we're not aware of. But we know that sometimes arrested women, they do house arrest, they come to the house and they arrest them, figuring out if they've been more vocal, and sometimes they get released, and then sometimes they get released and they will make statements, for example, that they agree with this thing, or that they apologize or something, of course with threats to their life and their family. So I mean, it's crazy, because think about this, even in the German politics, we have heard that evacuations to women's rights activists, to defenders of women's rights, to, let's say they are journalists, female, they are people that would be in higher danger. And it's not just women, it's also like the people that work for the NATO that were left behind. But this particular topic, you would think that there would be an immediate way to create tools to evacuate them faster. But the bureaucratic hurdles that Germany gives, which it didn't give to Ukraine, for example, like shows that there is no solidarity, it's performative. Like there are statements made, we are very sorry, we show our support, we condemn the Taliban, but at the same time, like the Taliban had their UN ban lifted of traveling in 2019 and it has not been restored, even though like we have seen that they have proven themselves like to stone people in front of masses should be already a reason enough to re-invoke this travel ban. But there are steps made that they are legitimizing these people. And in the same time, the actual Afghan people are the ones that are labeled as terrorists, whether it's at the EU border. So there is context, and you just see that you're just a tool for the strategies. Your gender is the tool, your ethnicity is the tool, and your identity as like where you come from is a tool, like whether you are called a terrorist or an ex-terrorist actually doesn't have to do with the fact that you could be a real mass murderer.
Thank you. Okay, we have more questions coming. What can be done for collaboration of all women's organizations, especially Afghanistan, Iran, and Kurdistan, to do some collective activity? This question comes from Shahla Abkhari, if I pronounce her name correctly. Meral, I give you the floor. Maybe you can address this question. And as you are at it, maybe you can also elaborate where this slogan Xinjiang Azadi that is now worldwide known through also women in Iran. Yeah, how did it emerge in the Kurdish movement?
Okay, so Xinjiang Azadi, what means woman life freedom, is in a way reflecting the women's liberation ideology on which the Kurdish women's liberation movement or struggle is based on. And I would say that Xinjiang Azadi, or woman life freedom, is something like also the summary or the formula of the women's revolution. And it means that its meaning is to liberate life under women's leadership, and not just under women's leadership, but under autonomously organized women's leadership. And this is expression of the paradigm, especially developed by Abdullah Öcalan, the imprisoned leader of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, who has developed mostly this ideology of liberating life through women's revolutions. And this slogan was used first at the beginning of this century, which was a time where the Kurdish women's movement more and more organized herself autonomously. So because before there were women-specific organizations, but together with the let's say beginning of the 21st century, the Kurdish women's movement within the broader Kurdish liberation struggle started to organize herself also autonomously and developed her ideological stance further. For example, in 1999, the first Kurdish Women's Party was founded, which was a mostly ideological party. And from there, they further developed on one side the form of the struggle, but in a dialectical relation to its liberation ideology. And Xinjiang Azadi is the most concrete expression of this stance that says that life can only be liberated through women's revolutions. And in order to be the leading force of a women's revolution, you need to be organized autonomously. So it's a kind of trinity, also dialectical trinity between woman, freedom, and autonomy, which is very, I would say, essential in order to understand the Kurdish women's liberation movement also, and to understand the leading role it is really playing for the general revolutionary movement. And I would say that, I mean, in order to come back also to the question, for example, this slogan was used at the beginning of 2000s at women's manifestations in mostly the northern part of Kurdistan, that means inside the Turkish part of Kurdistan. And after 2012, it became one of the main slogans of the Rojava Revolution. And 10 years after the start of the Rojava Revolution, it reached the eastern part of Kurdistan and Iran. And from there, it spread again to the whole world. So you see also, I mean, how struggles, geographies can affect each other, can influence each other. And I would like to underline also that Xinjiang Azadi was written on the wall in the cell of Shirin El-Emhuli, who was hanged later. And before she was hanged, she was raped. You know, I mean, just to connect to the facts she was talking about in her speech. So you see how it's coming back. So there are also kind of butterfly effects, I would say, within the worldwide women's movement, and especially the women's revolutions age, because this is how we see the 21st century. So now, just very shortly, very briefly, because we do not have much time, but I would really like to underline also the relation between Kurdistan, Iran, and Afghanistan, because I think that this geography is also from very big importance, because what we have in common also is, at the end of the 1970s, there have been imperialist interventions also in our countries, in the form of military coups, of military interventions from outside, and counter-revolutions. So, I mean, the process, I mean, it's more or less the same time, 78 in Afghanistan, 79 in Iran, and 80, there was the military coup in Turkey. So, and I think that the main objective of these interventions was to break the revolutionary culture that has been very strong and very well rooted, especially in these societies. And I mean, if the global hegemonic system is able to see the connectivity between these geographies, I think for us it's also very important to give an answer to these attacks in a united way, and to see also what is in common for us. And I think that, for example, World Women's Democratic Confederalism, which was proposed by the Kurdish Women's Liberation Movement during the Second International Women's Conference in November in Berlin, is a very important proposal in order to build a structure, a form of women's international solidarity according to the conditions and needings of the 21st century. And I think that, for example, Afghanistan, the issue of Afghanistan, the situation of women in Afghanistan should be an issue of self-critique of the international women's movement, because I think we should have turned the world into hell after the control, the power was given to the Taliban on a gold tablet. I think the same issue today with Iran, it's very important. And I think there is also the danger of embarrassing, let's say, the demands or the slogans of the revolution, but while doing it, emptying the content in a way. Because, for example, there are so many politicians and people that are actually on the other side, and now they are dressing with the slogan Xinjiang Azadi, for example. You know, those who are criminalizing the movement where this slogan is rooted, and on the other side taking it on the streets. You know, so I think it's also, there have been a lot of ideological attacks also on the notion which is represented or summarized by Xinjiang Azadi, or the women's revolution. What do we understand when we talk about the women's revolution? I think this is also very important, because some things seem to be very, I don't know, you know, it looks nice for many people that actually have nothing to do with it, and they embrace it and demand to represent it, but at the same time, I think they are changing a lot of things. So I think we should be very aware of these kind of things also, and we should really try to develop a strategy also in order to really make the 21st century an age of women's liberation and of women's revolutions. And for this, we need to create a kind of optimal balance between the local and the common. This is very, very important, I think. And we, in short, need to work more also on the theoretical level, I think. We need to make more theoretical production in order to find solutions to our problems and answers to our questions.
Thank you, Meral. And I think we are coming towards the end of our panel. And so I will give the floor to Shiva and Zolfar for the last time as well. And then I will, I think we are running, I mean, there are, I will also read the last remaining questions. So the one question came to Shiva from Wahid Bati. The question is from a friend of hers. He has the following question. What kind of influence has United Nations on the movement in Iran? Are they supporting you in any way? That's the question. And as you answer this question, if you can also say your last words, and then we can, you know, slowly conclude the panel, that would be great.
Thank you, Nazan. How many minutes do I have, or seconds?
I don't want to limit you. I mean,
oh no, don't do that. I'm gonna go for an hour.
If it's okay, if is 5 minutes gonna be okay?
No, that's fine. That's enough. I just didn't want to kind of go over the time. So one thing I wanted to say, I think Wahid said that the Overseas Progressive Pakistani is actually a brilliant organization, that they do lots of seminars, and I had an honor to be in one of them. That's one of the things that they're trying to work on, make awareness regarding women's rights in Pakistan, Iran, and other countries. And I guess in some way, Meral mentioned the slogan "Women, Life, Freedom," that many people as imposing, actually, they might not believe in it, they want to change it. But I think in some way, this is a power. This is the power of our fight. And the revolution now in Iran, that even those who are not necessarily for that, they have to go behind it and they have to say, we are for it. This is our power. We imposed it on them, if you think about it. And one point is that after this slogan was everywhere in Iran, some people try to bring another slogan, which is Mard Mihan Abadi, meaning man, country, prosperity, I think, something like that. And very quickly, that gone aside, and the woman, life, freedom was there, because it's almost, they couldn't tolerate that for the first time, women, life, freedom is out there and everyone is hearing it. So I guess women, life, freedom is the slogan, to be honest, for all women movement in the world, especially in the region. I guess it is one of one of the participants asked if it's possible to create an organization. I think Shahla Abghari was saying, if I'm not wrong, between, like, for example, Kurdistan, Afghanistan and Iran. I think it is very possible. While I was listening to you, I was just thinking, you see, we have big unions, labor unions around the world. And I know, because it's easier, you work in one place. Because of the way we are in the society as a woman, it's more difficult. We're very all over the place, and it's more difficult to have a union for something. Don't take me wrong, I'm for equality of men and women. I don't believe in one organization only working on the women's right and only needs to be consist of women, because the beauty of the fight now, the revolution in Iran, is men and women are fighting for women's life freedom, which is brilliant. And I said in my speech that women actually taught the society that you need to fight for women's rights. Otherwise, you as a man not going to have an equal life and good life. But having said that, I think every seminar that I come, I go with the same question that one of the participants said: what do we do actually? We know that we need to do something together. For example, I don't know, building a union, coalition or something like that, because the situation in Afghanistan, in Iran, and even Pakistan in some way, in Kurdistan, it's very, very similar in terms of women's rights. I mean, Zolfar mentioned the gender apartheid in different forms and shapes and exists. So what do we do about it? Is it possible actually coming out of this seminar, sitting down together and saying, what is it that we want to establish if we want to work toward women's rights? In terms of this friend that says United Nations is the united of government. It's not the united of people. So therefore, they always look after the government's benefit. And look, 2 years ago, they made Islamic regime as a member of UN women's on the women's status. I mean, that can tell you a lot about it. If they wanted to do something about Afghanistan and Iran specifically, they would have done it. They could have done it actually, but it's not. So they're not. The only thing I can see, but we can pressure them. We can pressure them using that solidarity in the world to, as I said, to push the government to boycott them. That's what we need to do. Why is it not possible to boycott the Islamic regime or Taliban? Because of the gender apartheid. And Nazan and Zolfar partly mentioned, because they benefit from that, because they rather have a controlled Islamic regime, because they don't have alternative in Iran. If they had an alternative in Iran, as they had before in Afghanistan, they would have get rid of the Islamic regime. And I don't mean that it's their power they get rid of the regime. It's the revolution in Iran that eventually overthrow them. But the international community, the UN, when they boycott the regime, it's make it easier to get rid of the Islamic regime, rather than legitimizing them around the world, having negotiation with them. And then here you go, people are being massacred on the street. And same go with Afghanistan, and even worse, actually. So what I wanted to say that thank you so much. I'm really hoping that we can think together and build a coalition or something like that just for the woman life freedom, which I think is very much needed. And I'm sure we can get lots of support around the world. Thank you. I went over the 5 minutes, I think. That's
6 minutes, it's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, now it's your turn, Zolfar, to answer the last remaining questions and say your last words in 5 minutes. Yeah.
I think that the thing that we all fight against is the patriarchal structures, with like in combination with the capitalism. So you have both of these like areas that is enforcing and are uniting our oppression in many ways. And while like in the global north, like I actually don't believe that politicians will decide something well for us. Like I definitely believe more in the people and the people's movement, and that like by understanding our impact, our voice, our consciousness, our sensibilities, our empathy towards each other is actually our way forward. And especially if global south movements connect and support each other more, rather than like getting more towards like, okay, no, I have my movement and that's like something I focus on, which I see in many also in the Afghan activism. So as more as we are able to like unite and find ways like, okay, like the camera is looking at this direction, I'm going to grab all of these other topics and I'm going to like instrumentalize them the way that they're instrumentalizing me, by like being like, okay, you cannot ignore these things just because you're giving me right now the limelight. Like, and finding creative ways to basically confront in ways that they are not able to, to realize. So I think that as much as we are able to exchange and unite and support each other, the more we can actually go against what is happening, which is separation.
Actually, Zolfar, there was a question that I missed, so I ask you ask the question and then we can finish. The question is from Aynur Pasha, and she's asking if there are any military groups of women in Afghanistan, because there are, like the Kurdish women fighting against the Turkish state and their oppression. Is there anything like that in Afghanistan? So they are asking, are there an ability to work in the state too, like Kurds?
There was a province in Afghanistan that had a lot of media attention, about 1.5 years ago, when there was a woman taking guns. And also the woman taking guns was like big thing in the beginning of the Taliban handover. It's very difficult because the Taliban have also received all the military equipment that the NATO and the US left behind when they evacuated and didn't destroy them, which is of course very questionable. So Afghans actually know like the amount of weapons that the Taliban have, and they also went through like house by house to collect weapons from people that were there. So I think it's difficult to compare the situations. And also we've had 40 years of continuous war almost, and continuous attacks. Like the people are actually very tired. And this is why also a lot of people were like, okay, Taliban, like I would say there is a certain percentage of Afghanistan that is just tired of bloodshed. They would prefer the oppression of their day-to-day life than to continuously see body parts in front of them. So I think there is like a certain percentage is like, okay, like we don't want fighting, we don't want Taliban, or we don't want an uprising, we don't want NATO intervention, we don't want all of these things. Like they're so traumatized and so stuck with like continuous generational and their own experiences, that I think it's very complex. And there's also a strong sense of hopelessness in Afghanistan. So this hopelessness with not feeling seen, with feeling ignored, with things just getting worse, also prevents like stronger obvious resistance, I would say.
Thank you, Meral. Thank you, Shiva. Thank you, Zolfar. This was great. I learned a lot, and I think it was very productive in comparing the authoritarian strategies of Turkey, Afghanistan, and Iran, and thinking about the resistance and the revolutionary resistance that women are showing in Kurdistan, in Iran, and in Afghanistan. And I hope we can discuss more about how we can collaborate, how we can establish like really, as you say, maybe a union or a democratic confederal women's organization. I think this is the task that we have right now. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
Nazan,
you.
for moderating, and many greetings to Argentina, to the Feministas de Abya Yala, and thank you very much for your contribution also from Abya Yala, from Argentina, and many thanks also to our translators.
Oh yeah, that I
Thanks to
forgot.
the
Meral.
problem we had with Arabic translation, with the technical issue, but there was Spanish and Italian translation, and thank you very much also for contributing to tonight's panel through facilitating the language borders or barriers between us.
Yeah, I think we should clap for them. Really, it's always the worst being the translator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all. Thank you, Nazan, for the moderation, and thank you for this very amazing, actually, seminar. Hope to see you very soon.
And thank you, Repak, for organizing it.
Thank you. Thank you, Shiva. Thank you, Zolfar, also for joining us as panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.